you very much. I would also like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak on a topic that is not only very close to my heart, but is also not only under-researched, but actually underrepresented in policy discussions. And that is the topic about data availability and the use of supervisory data in regulatory authorities in central banks. So for this talk, it's particularly important that I make the claim, the statement that all of what I'm going to say are my own views and do not reflect the views of Deutsche Bundesbank. So this is important to keep in mind, especially when I talk about the quality of the data that is available at central banks. Let me give you a little bit of background on how it is to work with supervisory data. In a world where you have an abundance of proprietary data, where the big question is, how can we handle the large amounts of data? Supervisory data is a bit different because the first and most important rule of supervisory data is that there is no sharing. That's a really bad word when it comes to these data, because much of the access to this data is governed by national law that is very strict in who can access it, and that is extremely explicit about these data cannot be shared with anybody. So one of the practical implications of this is if you want to work on supervisory data, you have to do it on the premises of a central bank usually. So these strict confidentiality requirements guide basically all the work that we can do with these data. The second big point about working with supervisory data is that the data itself, despite what you might think, is of very, I put it here very mildly, heterogeneous quality. So some of the information that we collect is quite nicely prepared, is clean, it reflects exactly what you think it reflects, but some is not. And it's very difficult to distinguish one from the other, and it's very difficult to handle the not clean data in a way that you can derive meaningful, robust policy implications from them. So that's one of the biggest challenges that we face with these data, even at a central bank that is tasked with creating and collecting these kind of informations. It's further exacerbated by the globalized nature of the financial system. The international standardization of financial supervisory data is quite difficult, and I would even say it has not been done. So despite of all the efforts after the crisis to coordinate on this, I have some examples, but very elementary things about what we record in financial information about banks, about shadow banks and or what is called other financial intermediaries, is just not standardized. So something that is called a money market fund in one country is not necessarily legally the same entity as a money market fund in another country. The same entity can have different names depending on which data set you're looking at. And this is quite maddening if you have to deal with this, because a lot of important insights can be derived only if you combine different data sources. So the international standardization is quite difficult. There have been some attempts at it, but it has not been achieved to this day. The biggest problem, I think, with all of this is the differing interests between the data providers, which are the banks, and the data collectors, which are the supervisors. We are given the mandate to require this information, but the people who actually can provide us with this information have no incentive to comply. The best that can happen is that nothing happens, and the worst that can happen from their perspective is that we have to shut them down. So the incentives for them to actually help us in making sense of these data is basically zero. So this is pretty dire, the whole background. On top of everything, from an academic perspective, there's almost no incentive to work on this because you can't publish it. In doing a nice paper about crappy data and how you can fix this, it's very difficult to put into any good journal. So very few people, especially economists, have an incentive to actually do this, to this kind of plumbing of supervisory data. However, when you do work with these data, because there's a paper you want to write, you have a policy question in mind, what I've seen in my work with different central banks, and I've worked on a broad range. I've worked in Germany at Deutsche Bundesbank on their data. I've worked in Brazil, in Uganda, in France. So I've seen a few different countries. And what I've noticed is that when you work with these supervisory data, the very exact same tasks seem to repeat themselves. And I try to list them in order to make progress in how can we standardize some of this, how can we make some of these tasks easier, and how can we use modern tools to help us fulfilling our mandate as supervisors. The first task that is always done somewhere is data collection through, usually it's forms and templates. We live in basically the 70s, where you provide a template, a written template to the banks, and they have to write in the information you require and then fax it back to you or send it via mail. So this is the way it's still done. Bundesbank has what we call a template center, where we still keep the templates for the actual PDFs that the banks have to fill out and send back to us. So this is not using any modern technology. In an ideal world, you would just tap into their systems and get an update of their portfolios on a live feed, if you want, because we are the supervisors. We should be allowed to have this kind of oversight. It's not that, so we depend on their collaboration and cooperation. And usually this is done through the statistics department, who has the very unfortunate task of cleaning this, checking it for consistency and errors, or sometimes the banking supervision department. So they are sort of on the forefront of getting information out of the banks. And this is manual labor in most of the places I've seen. In some countries like South Africa, there's at the end of some of the important information on reference interest rates, there's a lady with a calculator doing it by hand, because she gets paper, actual paper, and nobody digitizes any of it. So I wanted to do a bit of time series on this and say, oh, it's no problem. You can go down to the archive. And I said, oh, cool. Do I need to bring a CD or a USB flash? And I said, no, just bring time. So it's really dire, this part. But assuming we get through this, the next step you have to do is you have to clean, consolidate, and match the data. Cleaning means there's often wrong entries, because this is humanly done. There's a human being at the other end in the bank reporting these data. So there are mistakes, not just a few, a bunch, because again, the human at the other end has no real incentive of doing what you want. So there's a lot of sloppiness in this, and you have to check this. You need to consolidate the data afterwards, because, for example, Deutsche Bank has about 600 different legal identifiers in our data set. So what you think is one institution, from one data set that we have, looks like 600 different institutions. Their names change, of course, and they don't have names like Deutsche Bank Frankfurt or Deutsche Bank Dresden. They have names like VT8735. And so you need to keep track of all these completely meaningless names, and you need to find out which belong together. This can be done nationally because we as a supervisor keep this information, but internationally, the boundaries of the banking firm are very, very fuzzy. We simply don't know from looking at highly aggregated data, is this Deutsche Bank, and which part of Deutsche Bank does belong to it, does not belong to it. So traditionally this is done with Stata or MATLAB at the best of times, and we have developed a tool called NetGen, which I will show you in a bit, which makes this task a little bit easier because it takes care of this consolidation. Once you have consolidated everything, you need to match it with other data sets where the same institution has a different name. So this is another task that makes it more difficult. And of course, there are changes in regulatory requirements, so the forms that we give to the banks actually change over time, and the data format that it's stored actually changes, and it's very challenging. Once we have done this, you can use these data as an input to your models, and that's where the nice stuff. This is where the fun begins. You can do a model, an economic model, and you can derive economic implications. You can do policy work. You can write nice papers, but you need the clean data. And in a central bank, what happens is that one guy does all of this, and he cleans the data, and he consolidates, and he writes his model, and then the next guy does the same thing all over again, because there's no incentive that you share this. We live in a competitive world. Why would I do the data cleaning? Somebody else comes in a year later, because this is the time frame we talk about, years. Comes in a year later, takes my work, writes the paper before me, and I'm left out. So you do this individually multiple times. And once you've done this, you can analyze the model output using, again, MATLAB, or very often it's Excel, the tool of choice. I've seen FSUPs from the IMF where they provide a set of Excel spreadsheets for emerging countries in which they have to run models to see whether or not they comply with the FSUP. It's crazy. This is outdated. So we've written some tools that can help with this. A colleague, Kimmo Suramäki, already a couple of years ago wrote Financial Network Analyzer. There's a new version out now, and there's new tools, and I will show you one which is crisis metrics. The problem with how we work as economists in a central bank is that we are basically craftsmen. We want to create, let's say, an instrument, or we want to create a piece of furniture, and we have different tools at our disposal, and we do all of it ourselves, like a master craftsman used to do 100 years ago. My grandfather was a carpenter. He worked like this. He had different tools, and he did all of it himself. But in doing policy or doing data analysis in this day and age, it makes no sense to be a master craftsman. It would be much better to live in a world like this, where you have the black car. So all these cars are different papers. The black car in the front, the shiny one, that's my paper, and the guys polishing it are the RAs. And the reason why this could have been done efficiently by Ford was because he standardized the parts that would go into a car. And this is an important insight that we could use for the way we handle data within supervisory institutions. The key thing to reduce the work necessary to achieve the same policy input is to standardize the way we handle data. And you could argue that you can do this even more efficiently, where standardization is achieved through having different building blocks, and then you build a nice pyramid, which is the paper that goes to AER or Nature or something like this, and an army of poor interns doing the data cleaning and carrying the stones. And some of my interns will actually confirm that this is the true model of how it works. Now let's talk a little bit about how we can use modern tools to achieve these standardizations. The first part, the data collection, there's very little we can do given the confidentiality constraints and the boundaries of the law and privacy issues. So we can't just tap into the bank's computer because they have a right to privacy. You can debate whether it's a good right or a bad right, but they have it. And it's, yeah. Yeah, that is true. I will come to that in a second. There has been some progress, but not internationally. That's the big challenge. And so they have what the OFR, the Office of Financial Research in the US, they have a very unique mandate. They have very far-reaching capabilities in terms of defining data standards and actually not tapping into banks' computers, but asking them for any data they want. So that's a very unique position. And I think it's quite successful in the way what they've achieved in such a short period of time. So once we have done the data collection, you can use, let me just show you this. This is the reason why I'm using my own computer, just to show a few of the things that we've actually done. We've written a tool called NetGen with the help of Tariq Rukni mainly, who was an intern at one of the guys carving out the stones, which is a tool that helps you with all the data cleaning and matching, and it's open source. You can use it. It is currently being used at Bundesbank. It has documentation, and we've used it in other countries as well to help us with these tasks. It's sort of easy-ish to use, especially if you compare it with doing a very complicated task manually. And you can just find it through my website, or if you just Google for NetGen, you'll be able to find it. The better way to do all of this is currently used at Bundesbank, which just started, which is called the Research Data Service Center. So we started a new group. It's about a dozen people, and their sole purpose is to prepare data for researchers. So it's amazing. You go on our website. If you have a proposal that requires Bundesbank data, you send them the proposal. You ask specifically what kind of data you want, how you want it matched, and they will try their best to accommodate this. This is, from a research perspective, it's quite revolutionary, and as a person working at Bundesbank, it still feels weird to say Bundesbank and revolutionary in the same sentence. But in this instance, it is true because I've not seen this at any other central bank. So it's an amazing step that we've taken. It will take a few years until all our data sets are merged and combined, but we'll get there. So if you want to do research using central bank data, go on the Bundesbank website. It's called Research Data Service Center, and just send them a proposal. The model in the third step of this standardization, and this is really the key of what we have been doing lately. We try to standardize data. So we try to instead of sharing data, which is not possible, we try to share models. And the way to do it is you need to define standardized input for those models. And they're different. I talk about a bit how you can achieve this. But if you have a data standard and you communicate it to the academics and they write a model that is adhering to this standard, you can use the same model at Bundesbank, at Banque de France, in Mexico. You can use it everywhere. And that would reduce the amount of work necessary to do policy advice tremendously. So these models should use standardized data, and the tool that we have developed for this, and I just show it very, very briefly, is for, this is for a project I did with the South African Reserve Bank, where we had a big bank default lately. African bank went under and cost us about $1 billion to bail out. So the Reserve Bank is very enthusiastic about studying interconnectedness in the South African financial system. And we wrote this, or we developed this tool for them to study different types of supervisory data. So what we did is we wrote a library of different types of visualizers, and we used both supervisory data, and this is only toy data, so no confidentiality breaches here. We use supervisory data to visualize different aspects of interconnectedness. And you can use, for example, something like this, where you look at the exposure of big money market funds in South Africa to different firms. For example, here you can have a pharma care company or British American Tobacco, and you can very easily make it available to policymakers how highly is this firm interconnected to the money market fund industry. That can help in a setting where you have to take decisions under great time stress. And this is typically what happens when you have to bail out a bank. It's not time to run 20 Excel sheets and see how it all, you need this in sort of real time. So this tool can help you with that, and what we did is we standardized the data format, and we kind of separated the different parts of the working stream and wrote a bunch of, like a library of different visualization tools for policy analysis in a central bank. And then you can, just to show you one of them, SAP, SDE. You can write different models, and in this case, for example, we could do like a histogram. You load it, you generate the visualization, and you can have different types of visualization depending on the model that you have and depending on the model output. You can very easily, sort of like in a war room, if this were a military operation, in real time, generate information for policymakers. And it helps us, this helped us tremendously in getting their support in collecting vast amounts of data in a breadth that I've not seen in any other central bank. So it's a very nice tool that you can use to standardize data, and once you have the standardized model output, visualize it. The other tool I want to show you very briefly is called Crisis Metrics, and this is by a collaborator, Peter Sarlin, who has worked with the Bank for International Settlements. This is based on their locational database about the exposure of banking sectors in different countries to one another, and you can see how this unfolds over time, how the system becomes more interconnected. You can look at different countries and get more information about other variables of interest. So you can use modern technology, in this case HTML5, JavaScript, to make the analysis of complex models much easier and much more accessible to policymakers, to the people who have to take decisions with a very limited amount of time. And I think this is a big step forward where technology can help us. The challenges with this, I mentioned some of them, so let me be very brief. We don't yet have legal entity identifiers. So there's no unique name for a bank across all jurisdictions. So that makes it very difficult to match data from different sources. The aggregation level is not clear because a bank has a stake in a firm because they own equity of that firm. Does it make the firm part of the bank or not? Like, what is the ultimate entity that owns the other entities? What are the boundaries of a firm? It's quite fuzzy. We have very costly. It has been very costly to create time series because of changing data formats, and NetGen can help you with that. Another challenge where big data actually comes in, This is a practical example where we use data from iMoneyNet, which is self-reported portfolio holdings of all US money market funds. And they do something really nice. They report to iMoneyNet their portfolio holdings. What they do, however, is they have not agreed on a name for the same entity. So some of them report the Australia-New Zealand bank as AusNZ, and then you have like dozens of different variants of the same entity in these data sets. So you can't really identify them. You don't know what is the same entity and what isn't, because these names are not unique. So we wrote a tool which is available on GitHub where we just provide a set of simple matching algorithms, very rudimentary stuff still, that helps you actually identify which of these entities are the same. One word on standardization, and this is a visionary that I've picked here. John Postel was one of the first people involved in standardizing internet traffic and communications. So the way that these guys achieved harmonization, it's the same problem as we have in finance in a global context, is they defined what they called requests for comments. And in that you had best current practices, where one person involved in actually handling these kind of data, and this is internet traffic basically, said, okay, this is how we store it. This is the best current practice that is used at the moment. And then others would comment on it, and after a while from these best current practices, a standard would evolve, sort of organically, without a big institution coordinating all this, just by the input from the community. We can do similar things for financial or data and financial research. To conclude, just let me wrap up. The key task is of data visualization, which is the last step in this whole chain of making policy advice, is to condense highly complex data while keeping the main insights. There are various teams working on this. I just want to mention a few. Stefano's team with Simple is working on this systemic risk dashboard. Is very nice work where you can see how models used in academia can provide direct input to policymakers. Crisis metrics is a similar project. So this is a new trend that is coming up, and I think we should do all we can to support this because it's going to be a big thing. To conclude, the problem with the model of an economist in a central bank is that we are master craftsmen at the best of times, or just craftsmen at other times. And not all supervisors can afford to hire an army of master craftsmen to do the policy analysis. But luckily, we live amidst this technological revolution, so we can use modern tools to help us with this task. And the big challenge within any supervisory organization is how can we make the most of this revolution? We can learn from computer science how to address the issue of standardization, and also in terms with regards to what Rob said about agent-based models. Once you have standardized data, once you know how information about individual banks looks like in different countries, you can use this as an input for agent-based models in order to calibrate them. So it can greatly help using new models on the data that we already have. So I think this is why I think it's a really important task. We need more interactions among the data scientists from the various policy institutions, and I'm very glad that the OECD has hosted this conference, because you can play an important role, I think, in this process. The Basel Committee on Banking Supervision could play a similar role, because they are the ones involved with the banking supervisory data. And what history has shown in the internet standards is that this kind of informal forum can have a major impact, and I'm looking forward to the next conferences on this topic to see how we will do better in the future with handling the data that we have. Thank you very much.